Welcome, audience, to another episode of Diversitas, a podcast at the crossroads of diversity, business, and culture. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest with me, Chuck Stefanosky. Chuck is the Supplier Diversity Director of Independence Blue Cross, which is a major insurance company in the Philadelphia area. Over the course of his 2 decades with Independence, Chuck has shown a deep and abiding commitment to advancing the cause of diverse businesses in our area and bolstering his company's longstanding and impactful supplier diversity program. In Chuck's current role, he develops and executes strategies to enrich IBC's 30-year commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he has done so in the following ways. He's launched an African-American supplier mentoring program. He's also helped to develop landmark spending that IBC does with diverse businesses owned and controlled by women, veterans, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community. Chuck has received a number of awards for his commitment to supplier diversity. Those awards include the Emmett T. Vaughn Corporate Advocate of 2021 that was given to him by the EMSDC, the Eastern Minority Supplier Development Council. He's also been recognized by the Women's Business Enterprise Center as an Advocate of the Year. So we are honored to have with us today, Chuck Stefanosky. Welcome, Chuck, to the show.
Thanks, Michael. It's a real pleasure being here. I'm looking forward to this podcast all week. And I'm just really looking forward to talking about all the work that we're doing in the region to really make an impact on diverse businesses. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chuck. And so, let's get into it because as I was reading your bio, it came to my mind that there are a lot of folks who kind of talk about the theory of supplier diversity and talk about what could possibly be, but you are really and have been kind of in the trenches and at the forefront of the supplier diversity initiatives in the city of Philadelphia and with your company. So tell us what got you to this journey? How did your journey take you to the area of supplier diversity?
Well, Michael, my journey actually started probably like maybe 35 plus years ago. Prior to being with Independence, I've been with Independence now about 21 years. I worked for Roy Weston. It's an environmental contractor. And prior to that, Halliburton, the big government contractor. And back when supplier diversity programs started, 35 years ago, at least in my career, a lot of it was really just, it was spend. Right. Like companies, government contracts were awarded based on participation of diverse businesses, but there wasn't like a lot of really work being done to develop suppliers or being real intentional in making having supplier diversity make a difference in your business. It was more like I need to find a diverse 10% of my spend needs to be with a diverse business so I can get this contract. Right. So go find a supplier and make the spend happen. There wasn't a lot of innovation. There wasn't a lot of It was really basically, I need to do this, right? And, and supplier diversity has changed, at least through my career, from being something that was just done from a contract, needed to be done from a contractual perspective for the government or for a city contract, whatever the case may be, to really it's become a business imperative. So I've been lucky to see where it's changed over time.
Talk more about that. Talk about how it has changed over, because I know when I started kind of in this area, it was really more about checking the box, making sure that you have a certain percentage of diverse spend, no matter where that spend came from, no matter how you got to that spend, the only thing that mattered was making sure that that number was met. So talk about how kind of the supplier diversity space has developed over the time that you've been there.
Well, I would say at Independence, so I've been here, like I said, 21 years, it's always been top of mind. When our DE, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee was started, it was probably closer to almost 40 years ago. And that committee reports to the board of directors, the same as any other committee, our finance committee, strategic initiatives, investment, audit, governance. So it's a C-suite, right? And what gets measured matters, right? So at our company, it's always been a strategic imperative, and we see it as something that makes us different. We see it as it's good for business. And I really believe the reason why our program is strong, and many other leading programs in the region, is because it's good for business. It's not done just to get a contract or for savings or whatever or to meet contract requirements. It's done to be like it's a strategic imperative. It's just really good for business. Provides innovation.
Talk about how for IBC, how is it good for IBC's business?
Well, really what's really good for us is we're the leading insurer in the region, right? We want to stay that way. And it didn't happen just by accident. It was part of our strategy. And DE&I is part of our strategy. We want to be innovative. We want to think different. We want to do things different than our competitors. We want to keep that competitive edge, keep the customers we have and gain more. And there's a lot of other good benefits to DE&I that you hear about in the news about, as it relates to the employees and the programs and all that.
Right.
Those are all great things to have. But I really think the reason why it has such a prominent place in independence is because it's good for business, right? Mm. So if the business is doing well, because you're bringing in, you're doing these DE&I programs the right way, diverse talent, diverse suppliers, looking at issues around social justice and health equity, bringing out all that together from a DE&I perspective, it's good for business because it's a good program because it's good for business, right? We're able to, increase, maintain sales, keep a, healthy workforce, et cetera. All the things that you hear about associated with DE&I we're experiencing, and it benefits our business.
When I do presentations, I often talk about, now every company is different, every industry is different. So DEI and more specifically supplier diversity is going to have a different kind of business impact depending on the industry you're in, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Right. But as a general rule, the argument I try to make is one of the reasons why it's good for business is because to the extent that you diversify your supplier pool, your vendor pool, number one, you're bringing in fresh perspective as it relates to your core business, right? Because mm-hmm. you have these new businesses that are interacting with your procurement department, interacting with the company in various departments. And so you're getting that difference of perspective, which can often be helpful. And then the other thing is that as you diversify your supplier vendor base, you're also increasing your supplier vendor base. So it's not like an either or proposition. It's an and proposition. You bring on these new suppliers and vendors, and you get the benefit of increasing the value that you're getting from the services that you need or from the goods that you need. You're creating more competition within your supplier base, and that inures to the benefit of the company. Am I on point there, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, my perspective is I agree with you, Michael. What I like to call it is diversified, like it's really diversity of thought is what you're talking about, right? Mm. We're buying the same products and services we always bought. We're just bringing in diverse suppliers, right? And we've been doing that. Historically, we're about 30% of our spend is with diverse suppliers. We've spent almost $1 billion in the last 5 years with diverse suppliers. It's not by accident. And what we do is we bring in suppliers and they do an RFP or they compete for some work or get a direct award. Diverse suppliers win and lose at the same rate as a majority supplier.
Right.
Just the way it is. One of the things too, there's a lot of diverse suppliers within our region that are very qualified. And what really kind of bothers me is when I hear people that are in roles similar to mine in other companies say, I can't find a supplier that's diverse. I'm like, did you look? Because we're not having trouble finding suppliers that are qualified. We're just not. It's just not. What, Chuck? It's not a thing.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because I was going to ask you, because that does come up a lot, right? I can't find people to fill. And so does IBC have a particular process that it applies to identifying new talent out there in the marketplace to possibly bring in to do business with?
Well, I would like to say that we have a traditional sourcing process, right? And the sourcing people are doing their jobs. And our strategy is to source suppliers that are diverse to diversify our supply chain. That's our corporate strategy driven from the C-suite top down.
Mm.
So that's what the folks in the procurement group are doing, right? And how that looks is there's suppliers that I meet in my role as the Supplier Diversity Director for Independence Health Group. And as I meet suppliers, we do introductions with decision makers in the company. And what that looks like is, companies like Independence have systems that do RFPs, right? And so basically the supplier responds to a request, it's electronic and it comes out on a spreadsheet. And it's the suppliers on the left-hand column. And across the top are the rows of the prices and how you're being scored. And then the procurement people take that spreadsheet to the decision maker and say, hey, here's the procurement we did, who do you want to use? The first time a decision maker needs to meet a supplier is not on the spreadsheet. You need to meet the supplier 6 months, a year in advance, right? You need to be able to say, hey, look, here's some suppliers that are qualified to do work here. When you have a need, I'd like you to consider one of them, right? And so what happens is when there's an RFP and the sourcing person reaches out, they're like, yeah, put Michael Bowman on that RFP. Because I remember Michael. I remember having lunch with them or going golf or meeting or whatever, meeting, whatever the case may be. And so the first time they see you can't be on that list, right? It's got to be in advance. It's got to be sourced. By the way, that's what majority companies do. They're meeting decision makers, right? And you want to be meeting decision makers way in advance so that when there's an opportunity, you have an ability to provide to do the work. And I think that's what's really key at Independence success. In other companies, they're not, you can't just send an email, put on an RFP and expect to win work. I'll have a diverse supplier occasionally. It's like, obviously know a lot in the region, will reach out and they're excited that they got an RFP. I'm like, look, I'm glad you got one, but do you know the decision makers? Do you know the buyers? Who do you know? Well, I don't know anyone. I'm like, well, good luck, right? Now in the government sector, whether it's like price driven and it's more, maybe it is, maybe that would work. But in the, I would say in the public sector or people like Independence and other like hospitals, universities in the region, you got to know the decision makers. They have to have confidence you can do the work. You need to know that the people that you're going to deal with need to know about you before the RFP comes across the desk. So that's really the key part, is being involved early.
What are some, if you had to give me, I'm gonna to make it easy for you. If you had to give me 3 essential elements for a successful supplier diversity program, what would those be?
In order of importance, I'd say number 1, top, you need to have, it has to come from the C-suite. You need to have executive leadership that supports the program. It can't be bottom up. It has to be top down. It has to be part of your strategy. I would say that's number 2. So it's got to be, okay, it's C-suite, you have to have a strategy, then you have to have measurements, right? And you have to be held to those measurements. So if I would give you a high level view at Independence, I report up to John Colino, our VP of Administrative Services. You've met Michael, and report to Juan Lopez, our EVP and Chief Financial Officer, and the President, right? So I sit and John sit. We sit pretty high in the company, right? And so it's nice to be able to get. If I need to talk to another leader about considering a diverse supplier, it's nice to be able to. They take my call. They take the meetings. They meet with the suppliers, right? And they understand that what we're doing from a supplier diversity perspective is it has the C-suite's attention. It's just as important as, like I mentioned earlier, any other initiative. So, kind of the view I take in my role is like when I meet with an internal person, I'm talking about being a diverse supplier to support our strategy. I don't really care if they want to or not, because if they're not interested, their boss will be, right? And I'll just keep moving. So I think you need to be intentional. You need to be, you need to like work the strategy, and you have to have that C-suite support when you start, reaching out to others in the organization and kind of trying to put the foot on the gas, and increase utilization of diverse suppliers.
So I'm gonna capture that answer, because that answer really, that's what I try to preach whenever I get the opportunity to talk about supplier diversity. First of all, the fact that you start with has to come from the C-suite.
Yes.
Because businesses are, if not they're not dictatorships, but they're not democracies, right? And so to the extent that there is direction, operational direction, vision coming from the organization is coming from the top, and that includes DEI as well, right? And then the second thing about that is, in terms of it being part of your business mission, if it's not a part of your business mission, then it's not in your DNA. And if it's not in your DNA as a business, then it's going to be very difficult and challenging for it to work, right? And so what I've seen at other companies where they haven't been as successful as IBC is that they may have someone or some people that they bring on and they hire to do DEI work more broadly, and supplier diversity is part of it. But then those people don't report to any real decision makers, number one. And number two, they're not even connected to where the action is, which is procurement. So if you're not connected to procurement and you're not reporting to some C-suite, someone with C-suite accountability, then you're really like an appendage that has no blood flow, is how I see it, right? And if you're an appendage with no blood flow, then you're not long for this world. And as these companies have started DEI programs, including supplier diversity programs, they've done it exactly that way, which is why a lot of them are now falling off.
Yeah, I think that, as well as I think it's important that supplier diversity reports to the people that control the money. So supplier diversity should report to the procurement head, like John Kalina, our VP of Administrative Services, and the CFO. Because if you think about it from a C-suite perspective, if we didn't meet a goal, like the CFO can't say, I didn't know we were spending that money. I didn't know our budgets went up. I didn't know, because they control the cash, right? They meaning the organization, finance, right? So finance is saying, okay, here's our strategy, here's our DE&I program, here's all of our spend, and everybody kind of rowing in the same, in the same way. In the same direction. You really don't want to have someone that's not responsible for spend responsible for supplier diversity, because it's not connected. Same as with like DE&I program related to your internal human capital, that should report to your DE&I officer in human resources, right? Where they're doing the hiring. They can't say, I didn't know I didn't hire diverse talent, because they're doing the hiring, right? So at our company, you see that our DE&I strategy really has four pieces, right? It's the internal capital, economic equity is kind of recoined of supplier diversity, social justice comes out of our foundation, and health equity, which is really kind of a wraparound, but really out of our like chief medical officer, out of our, on the insurance side of the business. So all four of those pieces form our DE&I strategy, and they all work together. So it's not like it's, four different areas doing their own thing. There's a strategy around DE&I that encompasses those four areas.
The other thing I like that you said was the accountability, right? The fact that you have people within the organization that are actually accountable for the numbers, actually accountable for meeting certain metrics, right? You just don't have kind of, aspiration to meet certain numbers without any level of accountability. Has that always been the case at IBC? Has that changed over time? And is that something that you suggest when you're talking to other supplier diversity professionals?
I would say that at Independence, it's always been here. Our program's grown, and we have a lot more to it than we had 5 years, 10 years, 15. It's grown over years. It's matured like any program would. I would say we've always had that leadership because it started at the C-suite, right? So because of that, that's why we have it. We were very fortunate. Something else that I think was very fortunate in Independence is our program is really a tier 1 spend program. That's how it started. It wasn't, well, let's try to get some tier 2 spend from our major suppliers. It was use diverse suppliers. I think that was genius.
Use them directly as opposed to use them through your direct direct suppliers or vendors.
We have tier 2 spend, but basically it was built as tier 1. And I'm very thankful that I'm a recipient of that, because it's much easier to manage when you have a strong tier 1 program and tier 2.
Do you manage tier 2? Do you manage and do you manage and do you measure tier 2 spend as well?
Yes. Yeah, we get tier
Okay.
2 spend as well as tier 1, tier 2 spend. Exactly.
Without
Um,
giving too much away, how do you get tier 2 spend? How do you encourage tier 2 spend?
well, we meet with our major suppliers, and then we talk to them about what they're subcontracting and where there's an opportunity. Healthcare is rather unique as compared to construction or maybe another type of business. And let me tell you why. We have a lot of our members' information we have on our systems. We have your financials, we have your health information. It's all protected health information that you hear about when you go to the hospital and you sign all these forms. We do not allow the majority of our primes to subcontract work by
Right,
design,
right.
because we don't want that information to get out and have a breach. You haven't heard about us having a breach. We don't intend to have one. So our primes are not allowed to sub without our express
Written consent, I'm sure.
consent. And that consent is, it's not gonna, they typically cannot we won't allow it. So some of the a lot of the sub tier 1 we have, it's very limited, or tier 2, I'm sorry, because of, for that reason. Because we have to control that information. And as you know, Michael, being an attorney, once the information's out, it
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
matter what your insurance is, the
No,
reputational risk, all those bad
no.
things that happen,
Yes.
it's going to be worse than just the cost to recover whatever happened. So that's always been top of mind. And that's
So,
why tier 1's important to us as
right.
well.
So I'm sure, I know, as a matter of fact, that you talk to a lot of other supplier diversity professionals in different industries and different companies. Um, what are they saying to you about the challenges that they face as they grow and develop their supplier diversity presence?
I would say that the number one challenge is support, C-suite support from the top. So organizations that start a new program and they have someone maybe lower in the organization and they're trying to push supplier diversity through, and they're having some real challenges because of the C-suite support. The other is around, I get a lot of questions about data and measurements and goals. So how to build a program, how to track spend, how to establish spend metrics, and how to have a really strong program and have an effective program going forward. Those are probably the two main questions that I get. Oftentimes we'll find that they'll hire like a supplier diversity manager at a company. It's a new role and they're doing spend analytics. They're meeting with suppliers. They're doing too much for one role.
Right.
And a lot of my advice is, look, you need to get someone doing your spend analysis and tracking. Like that can just drive a lot of, it's important work, but if your head's down just tracking where you're spending your money, you're not going to make a lot of advances with the program. Also metrics, whenever I hear someone tell me that some of their metrics are like, how many meetings did you have in the last 6 months with diverse suppliers, or how many suppliers registered in your portal? That's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is like, you should be asking, what have you done to further, business with to diversify your supply chain within the business, right?
Right.
Like if I ever went to my C-suite and they asked, I didn't meet a goal, and I said, well, I registered, 50 new suppliers, he'd be like, why are you telling me how many suppliers? How many did you use?
Yeah.
Like,
What's your spin? What's the actual, I try to emphasize that as well. And I will tell you that I use it as an example of what not to do. And I don't know whether the city of Philadelphia still does this, but I know that when I started doing this work, I would often look at the city of Philadelphia and their numbers. And the thing about their numbers was that they would count as spend, or they would represent really as spend, the dollar values of the contracts that they executed with diverse companies. But there's a difference between the dollar value of the contract and whether you actually spent money on that contract, right? And those numbers you don't see, or you didn't see, at least when I was looking at the city of Philadelphia. So in terms of how people should be measuring the progress that they're making with their diverse spend, what is the proper mechanism or approach that they should use in your mind?
So for spend, there's a few things that are real important. And thanks for the question. Is number one, all our suppliers are certified by a third party. So we don't do any certifications that are self-certified, right? So a third party has to give us a piece of paper that says you're certified. Here's the start and end date of your certification, right? So your suppliers, you need to make sure that they are diverse and that they're certified as such, right? And as an FYI at Independence, we meet a supplier that's diverse, that's not certified. We frequently will pay their first year certification fee to get them certified.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Did that quite a bit. We don't do it like with everyone that just calls and sends me an email.
You might get a lot of phone calls.
They're diverse.
This.
Yeah, I get a lot of phone calls. So anyhow, we get them certified, we get them in the system. And then the tracking needs to be based on, it comes right, in our case, right out of PeopleSoft. And it's our financial system. And it's based on paid data, not on contract value. And so we run it, it's date bound, and that's what our spend is. And then we cut it by, the various, by ethnicity and gender, and we're able to track our spend by various types and report that to the board. Again, I mentioned earlier, we do it because it's good for business. Right. Our goal is to match our diverse spend with the communities that we serve. Right. The majority of our customers are in the 5-county. We want our spend to be diverse. We want to match our customers. Again, good for business, right? We're able to say, here's our diversity. It's important. And why is that important? It's not just a number that we report. It's like, are we supporting the communities that we serve, right?
Are you doing that reporting? Are you reporting out on a quarterly basis? How often are you reporting out annually?
So I get a report on the 15th of every month out of all of our systems for Independence Health Group, and it shows us how we're tracking. It's like a one place, I call it a placemat. Shows all the spend by commodity as well as by ethnicity and gender. And I see how we're tracking, right? And we have a lot of years of data and how we're tracking against budget and our numbers. I see that every month as a snapshot. I can't wait to get the report. It tells me where I'm at. And then I know where I'm tracking. And now I have one-on-ones with my leadership, and I'll let them know that we're on course or not. So if we need to self-direct, maybe a contract didn't come through, whatever, I have to have those discussions early. We meet with the board 4 times a year. I'm sorry, 3 times a year, and we report our data out to the board. You don't want your CFO to find out that you're not on track in front of the board, right? Way in advance. Again, like we talked about earlier, here's where we're at, here's our goals. So you can self-correct, you can increase to make your goal by the end of the year. Right. Again, at Independence, there's no tolerance for not meeting your goals. Right. For any of our committees, right? And so I would say monthly, I get very, very accurate reporting that comes out like clockwork, 15th of the month. And then about every 4 months, we meet with the board and share that information.
So, it's interesting that you talk about the board. Is your board very active and involved in this supplier diversity effort?
What I would say is, like any board, they have advisory, right? They don't manage, by nature of a board, they don't manage the business, right? So basically what happens is you report the data, they opine on it, ask questions and say, have you considered this or looked at, like to see, give me a different cut of data in the next report or ask for some clarity. And so the board gives a lot of direction, and we have a really strong board with a lot of experience, pretty deep experience in the region. So they ask good questions, and that informs our program. And I think it's really helped to drive changes in our program over the years.
Do you, in terms of the goals that you set, are these gross dollar goals or are they spend percentage goals? They're
actually both. So it's our reports typically show 5 years back worth of data. It shows the spend, the goal against the actual, as well as the percentage. And we look for increases in both of those year over year. And then we also, when we develop our goals, it's not just like me putting my thumb in the air saying, okay, we'll do 5 million more next year. We actually get our budgets from our finance team. And we see lined up by GL code, here's what you spent this year, by account code, here's the budget for next year, here's where it went up, here's where it went down. That happens usually in August. I see that, I look for big changes up or down. If there's a big increase in an area, I get a hold of the vice president or director in that area. say, hey, I hear you're going to hire, you're going to spend $10 million more in consulting. What are you doing? Where can I help you? Again, that theory, 6 months ahead. Where can I help you? How can I have you meet some leaders for some businesses in our region that are diverse? They have those meetings. When the work comes up, there's some opportunity to either bid or get direct award for some of that work. So that's where that comes from. Again, it's not by accident. It's not like waiting for the spend. It's proactive.
Is there any, it's interesting because the program that IBC has obviously is very comprehensive. Who do you benchmark against anybody?
Yeah, we've done maturity assessments. The Greater Philadelphia Chamber, the Diverse Procurement Collaborative did like a study where you fill out all these questions and answers around your program and how it's managed, how it's run, as well as some spend analytics. And it rates you on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being like emerging, 5 being best in class. We came out best in class. The Blue Cross Blue Shield Association did one. We came out best in class again. And it was similar questions. It's typically asked about your leadership, your measurements, how long have you been, have you had a supplier diversity program? Talks about things that you're doing around access to capital, awards you've won, et cetera. You get a maturity scale when you look to grow. And we're always looking to improve. If you were to look at our like reports, probably 10, 15 years ago, we would report to the board, you'd see 6 or 7 pages of spend data, cut all different ways. And you'd see a 1 page on initiatives. Now that report, there's 1 page on spend data showing that everything's green lighted and going well. In the appendix, there's all that detail. And there's 5 or 6 pages on initiatives and activities and things that you're doing around like access to capital, providing education, speaking events like this, things to further diversity, equity, inclusion within our region. We really believe that having a healthy community it means all of us kind of rowing in the same direction, right? So we want our, like a lot of the organizations we talked about earlier that I give advice to around how to build a program. We see that as affecting our community where we live and work and being an important part of our program. It's not all about us, right? It's about the region we live in.
One of the initiatives that you developed was this African American Supplier Mentoring Program. Tell me about that program. Tell me about how you came up with the idea, and tell me about how you think it's going.
Yeah, let me tell you how that went. Was it's something that I always wanted to do, and I'd say, Michael, you're part of the program. That was probably about 3 years ago now that we started it. And I always thought there would be something real rich in gathering diverse businesses together to see as a group, what could we do to network and drive business in our region. And one of the concerns I had is a lot of the people that are in this networking group are in similar businesses. And I always thought, look, if I bring in these businesses, they do work across Independence Health Group. Are they going to want to work together? Because they're, in some cases, competitors.
Right.
And I called a friend, Gene Waddy, who you've met, and Avis. And Avis Rivers Yates runs TCGI, another company that we use. They're longtime trusted advisors of mine. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Am I crazy? Like, does this make any sense? Like, do you guys want to do this? Because they'll tell me how it is. They'll say you're nuts, like we shouldn't do it. And they were like, bring it on, right? And unbeknownst to me, Gene Waddy, who I've been friends with since he started his business, when he started his business, he reached out to Avis about starting the business. And she helped him get started and what he needed to do and how to set his business up. And then, I ended up using Avis at IBC because I was looking for a technology supplier. I called Gene and said, Gene, I'm looking for a diverse business that does this. He recommended Avis. I never knew that she helped him getting business, right? So it was kind of networking, right? I found that out during this call with Avis and Gene. So I said, you know what, let's do it. And the initial vision of that group, it was 8 suppliers, a few from Caritas, where you came from, Michael, where you're doing some work, and others from IBC, some that were knocking on the door, others like Avis and Gene that were here. We had this first meeting and said, look, I don't know where this is going to go, but what can we do together to drive business? My initial thought was at Independence Health Group. It was right before the pandemic. And it's like, what can we do to make an impact? I had no idea where it would go. What happened at that same time was a lot of folks about 3 years ago in the region got serious about DE&I they were reaching out to me and our C-suite about our program, saying, look, what, can you help us get a program, stand up a program, give any advice for us? And I was talking to other C-suite folks that were reaching out to the organization at the same time. And I invited them to one of our meetings. I think we've had 15 meetings since then, Michael. And we invited them to the meeting and we said, look, here's some diverse suppliers. We met, I think, on Zoom a lot of the times because, again, the pandemic,
right?
But every 2 months for the last 3 years almost. And they ended up using some of those suppliers. And then it became really impactful. The first 6 months, that group did an additional $1.2 million in business. The second year, 15 million. This year, pipeline around 30 million. Due to that networking of like a dozen, now it's like a dozen businesses.
Right.
And it's through, what else happened is we got kind of bold as a group and very intentional. And I use that word a lot. And now when we meet, we're meeting with Exelon here, I think in about 2 weeks. And then a few other companies that are on the schedule. And what happened was when they asked to meet with us, I asked them, how intentional are you? Like, please don't take it the wrong way, but like, these are CEOs. These are owners of companies. We don't really have time unless you're going to use them. So if you're intentional and you're planning on using them, if they're a fit for your business, great. If it's a check mark, we don't have time for you.
Right.
Well, we've kind of created some exclusivity because more people keep knocking on the door because they hear about this group of suppliers.
Keep the exclusivity, Chuck.
Yeah. But I think that exclusivity, it's kind of nice where we got people on asking to meet with us, not the other way around.
Yes.
And I think that boldness to say, hey, when I say to them, like, are you really serious? They're like, there must be really something here,
Yeah.
So the impact of that has been, I got to tell you, that's the highlight of my career. I love those meetings.
It's first of all, you've done a fabulous job with it. And the second thing I will say is, there's a difference between, you started off talking about how, you have other people and, colleagues in the industry and other companies who are really trying to get this off the ground, particularly since 2020, the pandemic, et cetera. But PECO's been doing this for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So it says something about what you've done that you have PECO saying, hey, let me talk to these people. Let me tell them about what we're doing so that I can bring some of them on to what we're doing. I mean, it speaks volumes because really when I think about impact of supplier diversity programs just in Philadelphia, and I think about, who's the gold standard. Obviously, IBC is going to be a gold standard for all the obvious reasons. That's the reason why I'm talking to you right now, because IBC is the gold standard. PECO's pretty good, though.
They're real good.
Exelon's good,
Excellent
pretty good
program. They're doing real well.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And it's, I know some leaders there, and that's where it came from.
Right.
I'll talk to others in the region and say, hey, are you interested? Right. Kind of comes both ways.
Right.
And what I've really learned in my journey, Michael, it's not that hard. We get a lot of accolades. That's great. I'll take it. And let my boss think it's really hard. And, it really just takes intentionality.
Yes.
There's plenty of diverse suppliers.
Yes.
Just do it. It's really not that you can find diverse suppliers if you look. You can be intentional. You can build a supplier diversity program. It just takes some intentionality. And like these networking meetings, they're awesome. Like they're an hour and a half long every 2 months. And it works out really well. And
it's a real investment because 90 minutes in the day of the folks that we're talking about that's part of this group is a lot of time, right? But it's just worth it. It's worth it not just for the potential connections that one can make, but it's really worth it because there is this camaraderie that exists between people who are in that group. And it's not just, like to your point, I mean, your vision has been fulfilled in that those people are doing business together, right? It's not just, they're not competing with one another for the business that may come in through this particular portal. But they are, to the extent that it's not appropriate for them, they're supporting others. To the extent that they can work together on a particular job, then they do that. I mean, the camaraderie that I've seen kind of grow over time has been phenomenal.
I think what we did with that group, Mike, is we were able to say, it's not just about like the supplier, like Independence hires a supplier and that's the relationship, right? The power of the network is much more powerful than just IBC and work with a supplier, right? Working together, we can do so much more than just individually.
Right. So we're first of all, I appreciate that discussion. It's really, I think the audience really needs to hear from folks like you who know how to do it and do it the right way and do it, to your point, with intentionality. I don't think we talk about intentionality enough. People oftentimes, in any number of circumstances, can often get caught up in what the obstacles are, as opposed to trying to really focus on what the way forward is and really being intentional about moving forward despite whatever challenges are, despite the obstacles. I'm sure in what you've done, particularly over the 30-something years you've been doing it, there have been plenty of obstacles and you've kind of made light of them today. But the point is that you never let them kind of get in the way of developing the program that now exists at IBC. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, not about you, the career person, but about you yourself. So the first question is, what is one word that describes you?
Intentional.
I love that. Okay.
Like that. Kind of a theme.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
It's not always about you. In fact, frequently in life, it's not. It's usually about the other guy. It really
correct.
is. Yeah.
What's a talent that you have that most people don't know about?
Well, I started out as a chemist. I worked for about 10 years as a chemist.
Wow.
Yeah. And I worked on a space shuttle on the ground. I'm not an astronaut, but I spent about a year doing work for a well-known physicist in my first job with Halliburton. Yeah.
So when did you move
know
away
that,
from chemistry? I didn't know. That's a shocker. When did you move away from chemistry?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. But I worked as a chemist for Halliburton. I worked for a very physically imposing and just a really difficult guy, right? Bigger than me, big guy, right? And he would design these tests that I would run on these different components in the space shuttle. And then at the end of the day, I'd give him the results. And sometimes they worked out great. And other times they didn't. And he'd start yelling. And I thought, this guy's a nut, right? But I was making good money and per diem doing this assignment. Mm-hmm. So that project ended. And maybe a year later, he calls me. To this day, I don't know how he got my phone number. This is back, I lived back in Pittsburgh. He said, I have a friend that has a business out in the Philadelphia area. I think you should consider, working at this company. I think you're the perfect guy for it. Would you be interested? And I, being a young, like 20-some-year-old idiot, I said, I thought you hated me. and then the phone goes dead. He goes, you're the only person that ever told me no.
Wow.
And I never forgot it. And that's why I'm calling you.
Wow.
So I ended up, long story short, I ended up interviewing, took a job in the Philadelphia area, ended up getting an MBA. It was a hazardous waste company that I'd worked for when I came out here. The company was up for sale. I knew that within 5 or 10 years, it'd be sold, I'd be looking for a job. So I got an MBA and then got into the administrative side of things. Joined Roy Weston, it's a big government contractor. That's kind of where the procurement came in,
right,
and the supplier diversity piece. And then just, made a jump from that business over to a few others and ended up in Independence.
That's very, very interesting. That's very
so that's where I started out. Yeah.
If you had to identify your biggest success, what would it have been? What would it be?
My family, my kids, my wife. I've been married 40 years. A couple weeks ago. So
congratulations.
Success was the family. Yeah, exactly.
What book has had the biggest impact on you?
You know what? I don't know about biggest impact, but I'm reading one right now, Michael. It's called Intentional Networking. it's just, I got it on Amazon, the guy's Joseph Navarra, and it's really just about, it's an easy read, and it really talks about how to be intentional. And it's a lot of what's in there is what you learned in kindergarten, right? But it's really about, it's really about being intentionally making connections with others.
And the final question, your favorite musical artist?
You know what? I listen to everything. I can't even tell you I have a favorite artist. I listen to you name it. I listen to anything that's out there. So I would say vast. I really don't. I'd be making it up if I told you.
Okay.
But I really listen to anything, anything that's out there. And I think it's because I have 5 kids and they listen to everything. So I'm used to hearing.
How old are your kids?
Mix.
How old are your kids?
The youngest is 23. The oldest one is 39.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
God bless you.
9 grandkids.
God bless you.
Yeah,
God bless you.
Good season of life.
Chuck Stefanosky, thank you for being part of our show today. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks. I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
And to our audience, thank you for being a part of our show. We look forward to continuing the discussion and keeping it going. Until the next time, take care.